Joining as an S-rank physical rupture agent is Starlight Billy, or as the community has affectionately taken to calling him, Silly. I should place emphasis on the fact that he is Rupture, because he really does tick all the boxes for it. Does he have an on-field counter skill? Check. Does he have some form of HP related mechanic? Check. Does most of his damage come from ultimate and EX specials? Check. He even has the same best in slot teammates, with Dialyn and Lucia being by far and away his best team. While Billy isn't reinventing the wheel or introducing any fancy new mechanics, he does have a fair bit to him, be it multiple different EX specials that let you freestyle combos, unique assist counter that's both stylish and strong, and some steep damage numbers that make him a competitive pick. So let's go through his kit and cover when and where each of his skills is best used in, then go through his builds, mindscapes, and team options. After which, we can talk about his combos and how to get the most out of tricky situations where full resources aren't available, then close with some high-scoring deadly assault runs. Once you've seen all he's got to offer, you might just see why Billy is our final farewell to Season 2. As a very short intro to how Billy works, you notice a gauge underneath his portrait in combat. This can be consumed to launch an enhanced basic attack, Full Throttle Starlight, which does a fair bit of damage. The gauge builds passively as well as when landing most attacks on enemies, with some specific moves having added bonuses to their generation, one of which is Billy's EX special, Cool Wheelie. It has no resource cost and he gets this automatically after using his regular special, Drive Suppression. Said special does have a cost though, consuming his HP, but it also works as a counter, and pairing enemies with it lets you shortcut to the Cool Wheelie EX faster. So the crux of his gameplay loop revolves around it. Spend HP on his Drive Suppression special and land Cool Wheelies to deal damage and build gauge. Use some of his other attacks like basics and dodge counters to regenerate his HP so as to sustain frequent use. Then, when stun arrives, unload his Adrenaline EX specials, chain attacks, ultimates, and enhanced basic attack to dish out as much damage as possible. Rinse and repeat, and that's it. You've got Starlight Billy's basic game plan. There is, of course, a fair bit of nuance to him, so let's go into more detail regarding his kit, starting with his core passive. As a standard for Rupture agents, Billy scales off Sheer Force, converted off HP, ignores all enemy defense, and uses Adrenaline instead of energy. When loading into combat, he gets a nice 60 Adrenaline boost, and in some fights it allows for an out-of-stun EX special use to pad out his damage. As mentioned before, he can consume HP to use the Drive Suppression special, and when doing so, he gets a whopping 90% crit damage boost for 45 seconds. We'll go into more detail on the skill later, but keep in mind that it can only be used when Billy's HP is over 25%. He does take 50% less damage when under this threshold, but ideally you want to be above it, as if HP drops below, he's locked out of the skill entirely. Naturally, Billy has ways to recover HP. His regular basic attack string will reach in a bit with every hit. His regular dodge counter, if triggered off a perfect dodge, heals even more, and highest of all is from using Billy's Adrenaline EX specials. All of these moves also generate Determination, being Billy's unique resource. It's capped at 120, but only 100 is required for the enhanced basic attack. It's the only skill in Billy's entire kit that doesn't generate any Determination. Otherwise, each attack has its own build-up value. See the table on screen. Note that Determination is also generated passively at a rate of 2 per second, that some attacks have additional Determination build, namely the Cool Wheelie EX and Chain Attack, as well as after successful counters on Billy's Drive Suppression special and on perfect dodges. This last effect does have a 0.5 second cooldown, so do keep that in mind. When the bonus is given depends on the skill. Chain Attack gets it on cast, but the Cool Wheelie EX only gets it on its final strike, so make sure that all hits land before cancelling it in combos. That's really it for Billy's core passive. Stay topped up in HP with basics, dodge counters, and Adrenaline EXs. Then uses Drive Suppression special for buffs and the Cool Wheelie EX, building Determination alongside his other skills. His additional ability is quite straightforward. It's activated on having stun, defense, or support teammates. Whenever Billy lands a Cool Wheelie EX, the fourth hit of his regular basic string, and either a chain attack or ultimate, he gets one stack of Starlight, capped at 2 and lasting 45 seconds. Each stack buffs Billy's chain attack, ultimate, EX special, and enhanced basic attack damage by 20% per stack, so 40% total. Conveniently, these are all of his most damaging skills, so it applies to all of his bursts really. I should note that these stacks are invisible. There's no buff icon, nor do they show up on the effect details tab, but they are present. They're also persistent, so it functions as a general buff. Skills do not consume the stacks, and given how long it lasts for, maintaining it isn't usually a concern. With his passives out of the way, let's talk skills, starting with specials. Billy has 5 in total, and managing them is key to getting the most out of him. We've already talked a bit about his regular special, Drive Suppression. Although it can only be used when at over 25% HP, it only consumes 16% of Billy's max HP to cast. While it does link to the Cool Wheelie EX, the skill is quite long, and normally only does so at the very end of its cast. Swapping out of it will cause it to end preemptively. To get around this limitation, it has a counter property. If enemies attack Billy while he's riding, damage is negated, he gets a 5 Determination boost, and it goes into the cool wheelie EX instantly. While this counter is great and all, arguably the better option is to dodge. You see, if inputting side directionals, Billy will drift on the bike. By default, this changes nothing. It doesn't shorten the time it takes to lead to the cool wheelie EX, although it does look neat. What it does, however, is that instead of leading to a counter when being hit, Billy will perfect dodge, getting the 3 determination bonus that comes with it, then go into an alternate dodge counter, after fire spin. This attack hits pretty hard, having a multiplier of almost 400%, generates 2.8 determination, taking the total build to 5.8, more than a counter, and automatically links into the cool wheelie EX after. So while it does take a little more time owing to the dodge counter, it's more determination, decibels, days, and damage. On Thrall, for example, I had to make use of it to have enough damage to kill Sobak quickly. And on Defiler, as it's a perfect dodge, it means you can assist counter, getting it, cool wheelie, and a parry all at the same time. In fact, these bike assist counters were incredibly useful for stack maintenance. It's a guaranteed cool wheelie EX gas that doesn't sacrifice on adjudication stacks, for example. While it may be possible to get both a counter and a parry, I wasn't able to do it. On the flip side, a swap could be done on reaction to the dodge flash, making for a very easy assist counter. Although the dodge flash is reactable, this isn't true for enemy attacks. The wind-up animation before a drift begins means it has to be used preemptively, else it leads to a regular counter. And because Billy moves as he drifts, it means he can end up avoiding attacks without being hit, yielding no perfect dodge, so be mindful. While the drive suppression special has all these properties, it all comes down to how it links to other skills. It isn't all that amazing by itself, having pretty pathetic multipliers, and while it does generate full determination, that's only with a full cast. It also has heavy attacks on all of its hits, which means it will immediately trigger a chain attack when it lands. So if you want to integrate it between chains, you both need manual chain and to be quick on the trigger just to not accidentally go into another move instead. Its primary purpose is as a means to get to the cool wheelie EX, ideally through a counter or dodge. Said cool wheelie EX is especially useful. It's needed for Billy's additional ability, as it's an EX special, it also builds Yunqui tail stacks, and it's one of the best ways of generating determination, given its only resource cost is the HP needed for a drive suppression special. It has a low base value of just over 2 determination, but it then gets an extra 8, making it build 10 in total. For context, Billy's entire basic attack string, from start to finish, builds just a little over 11. So when cool wheelie is combined with the generation from the drive suppression special and any counters or dodges, it's his most efficient way to build determination out of stun. Even in stun, it sees use as part of combos, owing to both this and the fact it just hits pretty hard. Binary's Crushing Peaks, the punch he does as a basic finisher, that's 756%. Billy's cool wheelie is 780%. And if you'll recall, this multiplier is also boosted by the Starlight stacks from his additional. While Billy's out of stun damage is only a small fraction of his overall contribution, the fact this skill hits as hard as it does is very, very useful, especially for the fights you'd normally run Billy in. Why bother saving resources to burst down Sobak when you could, I kid you not, spam cool wheelies back to back and take it out that way instead? Defiler summons her Blade Totem? No problem, one cool wheelie is enough to take it out. Just be mindful that it does cost HP to get to it, so it isn't entirely free. Spam the skill too much and you get damage, sure, but then you try to use it when you need it most and nothing happens. While such out of stun use is somewhat situational, it's ideal to fit into combos when adrenaline is lacking, doing good damage and generating the determination needed to fit in multiple enhanced basic attacks in a single stun. It's got another combo use too, that being how it leads to an alternate adrenaline EX special, so let's talk about them. If at 60 adrenaline or above, holding the special button will lead to EX special high traction wheels. It deals a lot of damage at 1860%, and while it does have a wind up with Billy drifting on his bike, it's one of his fastest burst skills. There isn't much to it beyond that, it hits hard, so use it in stun for big damage. If, however, you have the adrenaline and press or hold special after a cool wheelie EX, instead of going into another cool wheelie, Billy will use rocking footwork, the alternate adrenaline EX special. It's a little slower, but also hits a little harder, at 1918%. That's less than 60% in multiplier difference, but it's still often worth using, for the simple reason that it's the fastest way to bypass Billy's last special, Run Wild. Regardless of whether you fail to take the drive suppression special to completion, or you do and get to the cool wheelie EX, Billy will twirl and chuck his bike onto enemies. It can link into Billy's standard dodge counter right after, but as it isn't triggering any perfect dodges, gives no extra determination or healing. This skill can be interrupted, there's nothing stopping you from going into a drive suppression special right after a cool wheelie EX. And thankfully, the game does let you dodge out of it, so it doesn't animation lock you into getting hit. But it's really more the kind of skill that you have to deal with rather than one you intend to use, so be aware that it's a thing to work around. The alternate Adrenaline EX is the one way to bypass that, so it's a good way to fit in a Coeli EX without sacrificing on time. That's a lot of specials and EXs with different uses, so let's recap real quick. Drive Suppression is his regular special, draining HP on cast, and it can either counter or perfect dodge attacks, with its primary purpose being that it leads to Cool Wheelie, Billy's regular EX special, generating a fair bit of determination and doing respectable damage to boot, being the core of his gameplay loop. At 60 Adrenaline, holding special leads to either High Traction Wheels, his first Adrenaline EX special, whereas doing so after Cool Wheelie leads to Rocking Footwork, the alternate Adrenaline EX special, and both hit very hard. After every Drive Suppression or Cool Wheelie, Billy will use Run Wild, and while it can shortcut to a regular dodge counter, it's more of a hindrance than anything else. As for dodges, we've already touched on them somewhat. He has a regular dodge and the one from the Drive Suppression special. Getting a perfect dodge as standard leads to Jewel King, his regular dodge counter. This is the same one that's linked into after the Run Wild special. Its damage is low, but it has a decent 3.5 determination buildup, 6.5 total with the perfect dodge bonus factored in. That's more than the alternate dodge counter. While that's handy, it's got 3 use cases really. If there isn't enough time to get the Drive Suppression special dodge going, it's better than nothing. I found myself in situations where attacks would align in such a way that assist countering off it was best. It's also the only dodge counter that can heal Billy. This won't happen after Run Wild, but will after a perfect dodge, so it's good to spam it if you're in need of some free top-ups. Lastly, it's the one way to shortcut to Billy's regular basic 4, so while it won't build as much determination as an alternate dodge counter into a Cool Wheelie EX, it isn't too bad, and this can actually help with HP management for reasons we'll touch on in a bit. After Fire Spin is the alternate dodge counter, and we've already talked about it. Good damage multipliers, builds determination through itself and the perfect dodge bonus, and shortcuts to the Cool Wheelie EX. Get in the habit of reacting to the perfect dodge flash for assist counters and you'll be good. I should mention that it isn't always worth doing. Between its own animation, that of Cool Wheelies, and the Run Wild that follows, it takes ages to swap back to Billy. Just swapping out of Billy after a Cool Wheelie EX feels cumbersome as is, with how long the wait is before he's available again, so doing it after the alternate dodge is even worse. His dash attack will never really see use, although it does trip enemies for some reason, so I guess it's cool for combo mads. He does have a unique dash though. Holding the dodge button will get him to summon his bike, letting you zoom around the map, which is pretty neat. As for basics, Billy has 2 sets. The first is his regular basic attack. It's a 4-part string and all hits heal him a little, but its multipliers are unremarkable, with the entire basic attack string doing less damage than a single Cool Wheelie EX. And we've already talked about how it builds less determination than it and a Drive Suppression special, despite it taking longer. So it's a filler option to help manage Billy's HP, as it's not as if you can go around doing Cool Wheelies over and over, and enemies won't always be attacking to get healing off dodge counters. There is one unique benefit to it. When using the Drive Suppression special after basic 4, its HP consumption is halved, making it the ideal place to use the skill. While you'd think that interaction doesn't see much use, this reduction in HP cost was something I tried to actively integrate into my routes. Killing Sobek with Cool Wheelie EX spamming is a big HP drain, so healing with basics then linking into a Drive Suppression special at the end helps with getting damage out without much sacrifice. This is why the regular perfect dodge shortcut to basic 4 helps. It alone heals 10% of Billy's HP, but then Drive Suppression costs go down to 8%. When coupled with the regen from the basic 4 itself, it makes for a significantly HP positive loop. The basic you're likely to actually work your game plan around though is the enhanced basic attack, Full Throttle Starlight. As previously mentioned, it costs 100 determination to use, and it deals a lot of damage, 2087% worth of it. Billy will ride his bike around while striking enemies, then go into a beam exhaust to finish things off. With so many different ways to build gauge, and with Billy's chain attack generating a little over 19.5 determination per use, it's even possible to squeeze in multiple uses of it in a combo. Well, almost. While this skill technically does more damage than either of his Adrenaline EX specials, it has a very long animation, so in practice it's best to get multiple EX casts off in stun, even if doing so means that some of the enhanced basic attack lands out of it. The damage split favors the bike ride portion partially over the exhaust, with a near 55 to 45 ratio. So even if combos may have the exhaust portion spill over and land out of stun, it's still nice to get 1.5 casts of it with 2 full bike rides. As casting the skill in full takes so long though, some combos tend to benefit from opening with the exhaust only, which is a lot faster. We'll touch on this more in the combo section. As it turns out, assists are one of the best ways to build up the said enhanced basic attack. Billy's defensive assist and assist follow-up are rather standard with its multipliers, but critically, both have determination build-up values, being a primary way to generate them in combat. This applies even to chain parries, so if you happen to block multiple attacks back-to-back, like on Defiler, this will build determination for every hit. In isolation, neither is particularly outstanding, but when considering the fights that Billy is best for, namely Thrall and Defiler, making use of them to have enough gauge built for stuns is critical to good routes. In my previous skill video, I did say that Billy's Zesbo generation feels rather lackluster, but I should correct myself. His Zesbo generation is fine, not outstanding, but not bad either. The problem is that the enemies you run him in aren't very accommodating of this. The first stun on Thrall is very accelerated, so it's easy to be in a position of being a few decibels short for an ultimate. The same is true on Defiler when gearing up for the full stun. As a result, defensive assists and assist follow-ups are important to integrate into routes not just for the determination build, but for decibels too. Something else that's worthy of note is that his enhanced basic attack takes precedence over his assist follow-up. If you press basic late into a defensive assist animation, it's considered as a tap input, so it will always lead into an assist follow-up. But if you hold basic shortly after the parry, the animation lock from the defensive assist prevents the follow-up from initiating. Which means that if there's enough determination in stock, this leads straight into the enhanced basic attack, being especially useful in fights like Thrall to get the most damage possible in a stun. As for his quick assist, it's very middling, but that doesn't matter much, as you rarely ever get to use it. This is because if Billy is over 25% HP, it's automatically replaced with a drive suppression special, with a 5-second cooldown. This can be integrated into combos as a way to skip animation recoveries and get in more cool EXs in a stun. The last set of skills in Billy's kit are his chain attack and ultimate, and both are very simple. Long animations, but with a hefty amount of damage to make up for it. In fact, his chain attack has the highest damage multiplier out of all rupture agents. In truth, that doesn't matter all that much, as his Adrenaline EX specials, enhanced basic attack, and ultimate all hit harder, so in a way it's the least important of his damaging skills. On the flip side though, it's one of his most important resource management skills. As mentioned before, it generates a little over 19.5 determination per use, plus it's useful for decibels. Without Dialyn, getting 2 per stun is ideal, but with her, converting a chain to ultimate is going to be best, and with good reason. With said ultimate, Billy will do a few loops on his bike, then Kamen Rider kick the enemy, ending on a flashy explosion. Its animation is very long, longer than even a full cast of Billy's enhanced basic attack, but it's by far and away his strongest skill. Unlike his chain attack, it doesn't get determination bonus on use, but it still builds a respectable 6.3 and makes up for it with its ridiculous damage. It also leads to very cinematic finishes. With all of his skills covered, we can talk about investment priority. As always, cool passive is important. While the base attack isn't as relevant, owing to Billy being Rupture, the crit rate on odd nodes and the 90% in crit damage it provides is going to make a difference. Unfortunately, since Billy's damage is spread out across his specials, basics, and ultimate, so too is it important to level all of them. Get core to at least E, then spread points out across the 3 big skills, with a slight priority for specials and ultimate, as they're going to make up a greater proportion of his damage than basics. Dodge would follow after, as making use of his alternate dodge counters damage is important for Thrall and Defiler routes, then assist for last. For Billy's Vengeance, his signature Starlight Rider faceplate is by far and away the best. It's the standard Rupture package. HP % main stat, a 20% increase to crit rate, and stacking elemental shear damage. Alternatives are frankly not very good. Grill-O-Wisp needs constant HP decreases to sustain its crit rate buff. While that may be possible out of stun, there's no way to sustain a drive suppression special cast every 5 seconds in combos. Well, technically you can get a drive suppression before an EX, but that just slows down the combo and has you whiff attacks at the end. Kraken's Cradle is a no-go for similar reasons, with Billy's healing off his Adrenaline EX specials meaning he would never be up for when it matters. Puzzle Sphere can be sustained without issue, but it's the same problem as on other Rupture agents. The attack % main stat is pretty bad, and for Billy specifically, its bonus effect is even worse, as it provides crit damage, something he's already massively saturated in. Between the 90% from his core, 30% from King of the Summit, 30% from Lucia's Darkbreaker, 30% from Dialyn's signature if you have it, and 50% from the current decree buff, and another 50% from Thrall and Stun, that's 280% crit damage before any stat bonuses. My Billy was at 162% crit damage, so that put him at a whopping 442% in crit damage total. Puzzle Sphere's maxed out buff would be a relative 4.7% increase to Billy's total damage output. Radio Wave Journey could work, I suppose. It has a HP % main stat, but its sheer force buff is being built incrementally over the course of the sun, and that means that it's missing out for most of the high value burst. Not to mention it has a 12% second duration per stack. But just because enemies have 12-second base stun durations doesn't tell the full story. Between stun recalcs and Dialyn stun extension, a full stun can last around 18 seconds, so it isn't doing much. Cauldron of Clarity is about the only A rank alternative worth considering, as Billy isn't too saturated on damage % bonuses, can maintain full stacks of it consistently, and both the HP % main stat and the crit rate it offers is especially helpful. Ishuan's and binary signatures would be the S rank picks. The higher HP % main stat and 20% unconditional crit rate bonuses make both be better than any of the A ranks. The thing with Vengeance is that maybe you can cheat for the lower damage against a dummy, but Billy doesn't have that luxury. If you're running him against Thrall, the time that it takes for you to kill Sobek matters for the route as a whole. While it's no problem to do so with his signature, running something like Puzzle Sphere meant skills that would previously kill it no longer do, so even with similar routes, scores were significantly worse. As HP on enemies inflates further, this cascades onto summons, and the problem gets even more acute, making pulling for signatures increasingly important to get the most out of a character. Thankfully, no recent bosses face issues of this sort, but the fights Billy's being run in do. Once I refined routes, considering Thrall's consistency, pushing 65,000 could be done without too much trouble on his signature. Even this is somewhat disingenuous though, as such kills were done with a fair bit of damage to spare. The second best pick would be with Ishwan or binary signatures, but even then I was getting around 58,000 or so. Runs weren't ideal, so you could bump that up by a few hundred points, but if considering only damage scores, that's almost 12% worse than signature. While I could just about kill Sobek after the first turn, it wasn't consistent. Thankfully, I could still lower its HP after the third with only cool wheelies, but it was tight. Cauldron of Clarity wasn't available in the creator server for testing, but in theory its performance shouldn't be too far behind that of the S-rank alternatives. It really come down to whether it has enough damage to take down Sobek efficiently. As for Puzzle Sphere, it was a struggle. After the first turn, Sobek always needed an extra cool wheelie to die, pushing out stuns, and after the third, I simply could not lower its HP fast enough with cool wheelies alone, demanding an EX special cast for it. All in all, I was scoring around 53,000 with it, which is 20% worse than signature. Actually, it's higher since I was overkilling, so it'd likely be closer to 22 or 23% worse. So in summary, his signature is, as expected, easily the best pick. But either Ishwan or binary signatures, as well as Cauldron of Clarity, can make do for decent scores. And anything else, like with Puzzle Sphere, set to fall far behind. As for stats, they are not very straightforward for once actually. HP percent on D6, physical damage bonus on D5, and either crit damage, crit rate, or, believe it or not, sometimes even HP percent on D4. Remember how I said my Billy had 442% in crit damage for this release throw rotation? Turns out that this is such a ludicrous amount of saturation that an HP percent D4 with matching stats was doing more damage than a crit damage D4. A whole 2% more in fact. Hindsight is 20/20 because I should have tested that before doing both my original kill run and the one on this video showcase, which both happen to use crit damage D4. Let me be clear, this is only the case because of the boss and buff lineup. On VR, for example, where only the agent stats are being factored in, it was a 3.9% difference in favor of crit damage over HP percent. The decree buff this rotation though gives 50% crit damage for Rupture agents. That alone is more than an entire D4's worth of stats. Then on top of that, Thrall also has a 50% crit damage taken increase, so that's 100% total. If using a neutral buff instead of decree, then the scales once again tip over, with crit damage being almost 2.6 better than HP percent on Thrall. Thing is, a lot of recent buffs have been crit damage oriented. Breakthrough from the last phase didn't, but Collapse from 2.7 phase 2 gave 30% crit damage, and Spectral Rupture from 2.7 phase 1 gave 25%. 2.6 was Clarity and Overwhelming Might, which didn't have any crit, but then 2.5 was Formation Breaker, with 40% in crit damage. So it tends to flip-flop on whether crit damage is present or not, but it just so happens that both of the bosses Billy is likely to be running against have crit damage increasing mechanics. We've already talked about Thrall, but Defiler does too, with up to 30% more crit damage from max adjudication stacks. Which means that on rotations where a crit damage buff is available, HP percent D4 is likely to be about as good, if not better, than crit damage. If I were to make recommendations, it would be to prioritize crit damage on a D4. Banking on a favorable buff and any potential future Rupture bosses to be loaded on crit damage is a tall bet. But for the time being at least, if you happen to be sitting on a strong HP percent D4, it will outperform a crit damage one. That is of course if you're at or near the crit rate cap, as otherwise that's a D4 pick. I should note that while it is possible to run HP percent on D5, it's significantly worse. Unlike Ishwan or Idhari who tend to see a lot of saturation, Billy only has the 40% from his additional. All other damage percent sources come from teammate or external buffs. Even Binary is more saturated on it when his Vidyaraja stacks are factored in. While I'm sure a God Road HP percent D5 could maybe compete with a trash physical damage one, I wouldn't recommend it. As for substats, it follows the same logic. Crit rate is by far and away the most valuable row. When you're getting, 442% more damage on an attack when it crits, making sure all of them do is a big deal. After that, and, well, that rides on saturation. As I've touched on before, while crit damage is going to be marginally better than HP percent in a neutral environment, it's not by much, and would actually be worse in the current boss rotation. One substat is 1/10 of a drive disk main stat, so with similar proportions it's all the same. If you have a crit damage D4, on the current rotation at least, HP percent is going to be a fair bit better for substats. If you're running an HP percent before though, then it might change. It rises on how many subs you've got for each. At the very least, whereas with other Rupture agents, an HP percent sub would usually be around 2/3 of a crit damage one, this is a lot more even for Billy. Substat count has always been superior to distribution, but here it's so situational that this holds more true for him than almost any other agent before. 5-disc set picks follow a similar approach to stats. Yunqui Tails is the only viable 4-piece, not much to comment here as is the Rupture standard. 2-piece though, Woodpecker is best at missing crit rate, but barring that, either of the damage percent discs, so that's Fang Metal and Whitewater Ballad, or crit damage with Punch and Blade Song would all work out. In a neutral environment, I was hitting for 0.3% more with a crit damage 2-piece over a damage percent one. But that was with 5 crit damage subs. That's 122% on the stat sheet. With just a few more rows, thanks to our good old friend Saturation, that means a damage percent 2-piece would be better even in a neutral environment. Once you factor in endgame buffs and boss mechanics, it'd be far better. Another note to self to test these things before pushing for kills: do as I say, not as I do when it comes to these showcase builds. I should mention that, of course, this goes both ways. Bosses and buffs that provide damage percent bonuses aren't rare. In fact, many Rupture compatible buffs that give crit damage, like Collapse or Spectral Rupture, also increase damage percent. So in practice, both damage percent and crit damage 2-pieces are going to be about as good as each other. Whatever has the highest substats is almost certain to win out. This is all fine and dandy for drive disc choices, but it's also important to be aware of drive disc management. Billy does demand some level of thought put into keeping up Yunqui Tail stacks. His accessible EX for stack build is Cool Wheelie, which needs no adrenaline. That's great on the surface, but keep in mind that it comes after his drive suppression special, which has both a long animation and costs HP. On Defiler, for example, maybe land a Cool Wheelie at 251, but after a set of parries, you might just about get the next at 236. That's 15 seconds, which means the buff was just about to drop, or is already gone. Best of luck trying to get all 3 stacks back up before stun. Managing this is important for Thrall too. You want to be using specials to refresh the buff during the miasma phase, so that it's up for the stun that follows, but it's easy to find yourself out of HP with which to do so. It may not use up adrenaline, but that doesn't mean it has no cost, and that's something you need to keep in mind. You aren't just swapping the Billy out of stun to do a bit of damage or build determination with the Cool Wheelie EX, you're also doing this to keep Yunqui stacks up throughout the fight so that every stun starts with it being maxed out. It doesn't have to be Cool Wheelie, mind you. Miasma resource recovery means that it's often worth using an Adrenaline EX while it's up, so as to not overcap on resources when the shield pops, so that works too. Just try to do so in a way that helps keep up those stacks. This drive disc set is conditional on skill use, and for the fights Billy is used in, extended phase transition periods do demand active management. As important as his builds are his teams because they make a big difference. True to the Rupture archetype, Dialyn and Lucia are his best partners. Dialyn in particular is a near perfect fit. She's a physical agent, which means weakness matching on the same bosses as Billy, being critical to pushing 4-stun routes on Thrall and Defiler. With so much of Billy's damage coming from his ultimate, her conversion mechanic plays into the strength and massively elevates his combo damage. And with Sad Ultimate and other high damaging skills having ridiculously long animations, her stun extension can feel like a must-have to fit everything in. Lucia is great as well. The healing on her ultimate can actually be somewhat helpful at keeping Billy topped up, especially in intermissions and phase transitions where you want to use a special to maintain Yunqui stacks, but have few ways to restore HP owing to boss behavior. Really though, it's her numbers that are obviously the selling point, being far above those of other options. And that's it. That's all of Billy's scenes. Realistically, he does have alternatives, but the disparity in scores between a Dialyn Lucia team and literally anything else is the biggest out of any Rupture agent we've gotten so far. So the rest of the section is just going to be me rambling about why that is. The stunner situation is the most egregious. Jufufu seems like a good alternative. She buffs ultimates and chain attacks, which are a big part of Billy's damage, and the extra decibels that she supplies means that, in theory, Billy could get 4 decibel ultimates in every fight. Problem is, her daze isn't really accommodating of that. To be frank, I didn't bother routing Jufufu like I did Dialyn on Thrall and Defiler, but I wasn't remotely close to pushing 4 stuns on either of them. Even if Billy had the decibels to ultimate 4 times, he's getting 3 in stun at most. Then there's the matchup issue. She buffs crit damage with her passive, which is great, but Billy is pretty darn saturated on it already against his ideal bosses, namely Thrall and Defiler. It's bad in reverse too. Jufufu is great for Wandering Hunter, but that's a 40% physical res enemy, so you really don't want to run Billy into that. The fight I'd wager she'd be closest to Dialyn in performance as Miasma Priest, but I couldn't test against it, and let's be honest, you'd run Ishwan into it. Where I was getting 65,000 on Thrall with Dialyn, I was just under 48,000 with Jufufu. If you strip out performance points, it's almost a 40% difference in scores. Granted, I didn't bother routing it all that much, so I could see better Jufufu runs scoring well into the low 50,000s, but even then a 10 to 15,000 score gap isn't looking good. Even the drop from Puzzle Sphere wasn't as steep. Trigger can work, but her signature does nothing here, and while Billy does do some damage out of stun, it's nowhere near enough for it to elevate her buffs. The lack of days from missing her additional meant I couldn't force stun, even on Defiler. Never say never, I suppose. I'm sure there may be some routes that allow for it, but I wasn't about to grind for it. Qingyi can work too, it's just that she's not going to be pushing 4 stuns on Thrall. Her stun damage multiplier gain is already massively saturated on him as is, and getting her enhanced basic to land twice between every stun is a pain. She does do better on Defiler given that she can 4 stun, but balancing her on-field needs with Billy's own felt awkward. While she could outscore Trigger, failing to hit 4 stuns had her do far worse, which wasn't even possible on Thrall anyways. For non-limited options, it's, as you'd expect, even worse. In theory, Pokra actually synergizes quite well. She is physical, so she at least works as a functional pick with matching weakness, and because Billy's Drive Suppression special has heavy attacks on all of its hits, every Pokra EX special or assist follow-up immediately leads to Hunter's Gate attacks, which can help her build some days. Unfortunately, it's still way too little for 4 stuns, and she offers negligible buff value overall, limiting her utility. Anything else isn't even worth a mention. Maybe Kaleda or Caesar. The former does have a lot of days, and the latter at the very least provides some buffs, but I frankly didn't even bother testing. There is potential for future stunners here. While Billy's ultimate damage is very high, it's actually lower than Bindways, who casts his a lot faster, so anything that offers matching damage through other means or has similar synergies, like with stun extensions, could be comparable in performance. As it stands though, it's rough. Lucia's alternatives aren't as bad, but still yield big score differences. Pan is the go-to free-to-play option and the best alternative for those lacking Lucia. He's got similar synergy with his heal on Ornament, as it helps with HP management and transitions. The Bunny and Wonderland set is also especially easy to build stacks for on Thrall and Defiler both, and if you happen to have defender signatures like Half Sugar Bunny or Tusk of Fury, his buff value isn't terrible. Still, it comes down to numbers. Lucia's buffs are a lot better, so she is a lot better. Like with Wengeance, the lack of buff value that he provides makes it much harder to go so back, and this significantly impacts Billy's scores, making merely getting to 4 stuns a struggle. Asterisk can work too. Her quick assist leading to a special cast can be both good and bad. It's a way to get off other characters quickly, like during an assist follow-up that would otherwise be swap locked. But between Billy's own casts and Asterisk prompts, it can be so frequent that Billy might find himself out of HP, so routing runs gets a lot more complicated. Her chain conversion doesn't help much either. Out of Billy's damaging skills, his chain attack is the weakest, and he's barely got time to fit everything in a combo as is. It could technically replace a cool wheelie if you aren't double EXing, but it gets very gimmicky, and chances are your attacks will be landing out of stun anyways. It's workable, but Pan is free and buffs better. Unless, of course, you happen to have Astra M1, then go for it. Talking about M1, Billy's is really good. It provides 60 extra adrenaline on entering combat, and this helps fit in an out-of-stun EX early on, but the real value is the 18% physical res ignore. This is about on par with support M1s like Astra's and Lucia's, but strict to Billy rather than working as an enemy debuff or a team-wide buff respectively. Since he's doing a good 95% plus of the damage even with Dialyn on the team, a unit infamous for having good personal damage contribution, it's close enough in value to the support Mindscapes. In fact, it can be even better. 5% of the current Thrall's HP is just under 10 million, so that's the amount of damage that isn't being buffed by Billy's M1. A 15% increase in damage to that from, say, Lucia's M1 amounts to just under 1.5 million. Meanwhile, in the current rotation, a single out-of-stun Billy EX special is doing 2 million damage. That's before being buffed by M1. So while the bulk of this Mindscape is on the res ignore, that 60 free adrenaline is enough to make it better than other M1s in the damage department. Naturally, other agent Mindscapes have their own added benefits. Lucia's extra decibel generation can open up new routes, like making so that you don't need to parry fish or double chain before the Defiler's full stun. What I mean to say here is, anything goes. Whether you go for Billy's Mindscape or that of his teammates, all are very good picks. As for him too, it actually changes up his combos and routing options. It's a standard damage increase to his enhanced basic, cool wheelie, and ultimate. This means that not only is cool wheelie a little more competitive with his adrenaline EXs, having his enhanced basic spill out of stun is a greater damage loss than before. Thankfully, it also gives the tools to deal with it, letting Billy instantly go into cool wheelie by consuming a turbocharged stack. It's capped at 1 and built after using either of his adrenaline EX specials or hitting a stunned enemy with his drive suppression. There's also an added 50% crit damage bonus to the cool wheelie when consuming the stack for an instant cast, so doing single adrenaline combos is likely to be best. We'll go over what this means in the combo section, but essentially it makes Billy's combos not just hit harder, it also gives him better resource economy as a result. His M4 gives an 8% crit damage buff, stacking twice when using the drive suppression special. I can faintly hear the echoes of a familiar word. What was it? Saturation. At the 442% crit damage I have, that's an increase of 3%. If you were to cut out Chill and Thrall's buff, lower Billy's crit damage to say 150%, then it's more like 3.7%. Not much better, but at the very least it's an M4 that increases damage, which isn't something that can be said for many. It also has an additional effect where, if Billy is not the active character and is under 35% HP, he'll recover, just very slowly. As for M6, it's an 18% increase in sheer damage to ultimate and the enhanced basic attack. Considering this is a relatively undiluted bonus and stacks multiplicatively with flat sheer increases like from Lucia's Darkbreaker, it's especially strong. Even with saturation from Yunqi Tails and Billy's signature, that's almost a 14% increase. It'd be safe to assume around half of his damage to come from these two skills, so that'd be a 7% increase. That's not all though, as landing the final hit of his basic 4, Core Wheelie, or his chain attack gives a stack of brilliant Starlight, capped at 6. Two of them are consumed on ultimate or enhanced basic attacks to do 100% of sheer force as additional damage per stack. You can technically get up to 8 ticks per stun with Dialyn, as Billy will recover some stacks during a combo. That makes for an 800% increase in damage multiplier for every stun. Realistically, it won't always be 8 ticks, not every combo has double ultimates or lands 2 full enhanced basic attacks in, but even still it's a decent value add. Before showing off some runs, it's worth breaking down Billy's combo theory. On the surface, it's very simple. Get as many ultimates, adrenaline EX specials, enhanced basics, and chain attacks in a stun period as possible. The ideal combo opens with Billy's enhanced basic, time to start as soon as the stun is triggered by another character's skill, usually a stunner's EX for King of the Summit. As soon as the exhaust portion lands in full, that's the cue to trigger a chain attack back to Billy. A useful trick is to hold down the special button during his chain attack. That way, Billy immediately transitions into his adrenaline EX special after the chain prompt is cancelled or expires. This matters because, since you have to press EX to hold it, doing so from a neutral state always leads to drive suppression first. That's not only wasting HP, it's also a lot slower, and Billy needs to save every last second of stun to fit everything in. As the adrenaline EX lands, swap out of Billy and chain back to him once more, only to animation cancel its recovery with an ultimate, again saving every last second. Then as before, hold down special to go into a second adrenaline EX, which should ensure there's enough determination to finish off the combo with an enhanced basic attack. The exhaust does land out of stun, but that's the most we can fit. If you recall, there's a slight slant and damage split to the first part of the enhanced basic, so getting 2 bike rides and 1 exhaust and stun is plenty good. Dialyn follows the exact same structure, but instead of doing 2 chain attacks, 1 is converted into an ultimate. Despite his stun extension, it plays out exactly the same, as all that it does is make up for the additional time that's taken with Billy's ultimate. I should point out that this combo with Dialyn does demand Billy to be at or near 120 determination at the start. Not having a second chain attack's worth of determination means that he's only just getting the gauge needed for a second enhanced basic at the end, so keep a close eye on resources when going into a stun. In circumstances where you don't have enough for 2 adrenaline EXs, or happen to have them too, after the chain attack, go into a drive suppression special. Then as soon as Core Wheelie hits, ultimate. While this does mean a slightly longer chain attack animation, the drive suppression to Core Wheelie string is actually a little faster than a regular adrenaline EX if its recovery animation is cancelled with the ultimate, so everything still fits in just fine, even at M0. It's also more determination than a double EX, so while it'd normally be weaker, if going into a stun without enough gauge build for 2 enhanced basics, doing this regular special variant can end up better if the extra determination ends up being the difference. I did mention before though that sometimes opening with the exhaust is needed, and that's indeed the case for a double chain, double ultimate combo. For this variant, begin with the enhanced basic attack before stun starts. Then initiate the stun right as it's about to land, timing another heavy attack to trigger a chain as soon as it hits in full. The rest is as standard. Go into an adrenaline EX, then trigger a second Billy chain once it's done. That's followed by an ultimate and a second adrenaline EX comes after it, but instead of going into another enhanced basic attack, it's at this point that Dialyn can be swapped to for the forced ultimate. If everything's done right, it should land in full with a little time to spare. It's worth noting that this double chain, double ultimate combo is worse than the standard one, by almost a full 1000% multiplier's worth. As previously mentioned, chain attack is the weakest of Billy's burst skills. Giving up 2 bike rides from enhanced basic attacks for just 1 chain isn't the best trade-off. This is however still worth doing in some routes, like on Thrall's first stun. It's already hard as it is getting enough decibel to use Billy's ultimate if pushing for a quick stun, so the double chain helps with that. There also isn't time to stock up on determination to get 2 uses of the enhanced basic attack in a single stun anyways, as Billy goes into it as soon as 100 determination is built. Not like it's much of an issue, as it can then be used to help kill Soulback right after. A chain attack may be worse than an enhanced basic, but it is better than a Core Wheelie, so in this case, it's the best option. These kind of situations are what really dictate how Billy's combos end up looking. On Defiler, for example, I found it best using Adrenaline EX out of stun and go for only 1 Adrenaline EX on the first stun. That meant I wasn't overcapping on Adrenaline, and given Defiler's low stun damage multiplier bonus, having 1 extra Adrenaline EX cast in the fight yielded high overall damage. It also meant I'd have enough for 2 Adrenaline EXs on the second stun, where Billy was short of decibels. Having that fill in for the missing ultimate made for both more comfortable routing and higher scores. On Thrall, I'd be going into the third stun without enough decibels, adrenaline, or determination, so squeezing in a cool wheelie between chains helped build the resources needed to fit an alternate adrenaline EX. That same combo was also the perfect opportunity to use a quick assist from Lucia's ultimate to animation cancel the recovery of Billy's enhanced basic. This character is all about adaptability, be it in predicting enemy attacks to get bike assist counters, weaving in alternate adrenaline EXs to get the most out of a combo, or even styling on enemies with multiple perfect dodges at the start of a fight, which just so happens to be needed to have enough determination for an early stun, are all factors that contribute to a good score. Now that we've covered everything there is about Billy, let's have a look at some runs and show off what he can do. Starlight Billy may just be Ruptured the character, but he does so both well and in style. Killing summons with bike flips, bouncing between different EX special variants, or simply getting a wipeout with Rider Kick really do sell this character, and he's got the numbers to support it. I've already had the kill uploaded, but those substats weren't particularly relatable. Instead of 39, the kill on show here was pretty comfortable at 36 subs, and with both resources and damage to spare. The ultimate was overkilling as is, and with faster stuns to fit in another enhanced basic, there's so much more potential score to be had. Let's not forget my failure to run HP percent D4 and need damage percent 2Ps. Recent agents have not been able to kill on release at all M0s, so Billy managing it like this is pretty darn impressive. Admittedly, the Kree is particularly egregious as far as Rupture shows go, but that shouldn't take away from looking at how strong he is regardless. Part of the reason why buffs are this ridiculous is because bosses have also gotten absurdly fat, 197 million HP throw and all. Getting this kind of score with thousands of points left to bag is worthy of note. And come on, it was only in 2.7 that we had certain Nightfall. For all my glazing, Billy isn't devoid of issues. As is the case with almost every agent so far, once Show moves on, he isn't going to be killing without some level of vertical investment. He's overly dependent on Dialyn and Lucia, which isn't ideal given how highly on demand they are, and the ever-increasing count of half-death bosses puts him at risk of having limited use cases in the future. These are issues that plague Rupture as a whole though, so nothing that's particularly unique to him. I suppose he is more demanding of Dialyn and Lucia than the others. Wandering Hunter having physical resistance as a de facto Rupture boss is a downside, and he shares an element with Yeshunguan. At the same time, it's precisely because of these he could be more resilient to anti-Show. I could definitely see a physical weak but double death boss come around the next time we get a Rupture agent. All this is little more than idle speculation though. Getting a character shouldn't come down to whether or not they're killing bosses on release, but by whether you vibe with their design and gameplay. Score, shield, and predictions aside, I think Billy hits a niche audience that hasn't gotten much love as of late. Look, I'm no stranger to feeling burnt out of ZZZ, and yet this time around, even when I'd mess up and be just short of a kill, having Shay just let's go Rider Kick playing in the background while screaming. Right as I would hit a wipeout did bring a smile to my face. Billy won't be for everyone, but for those that like this kind of character, he ticks all the right boxes. At the very least, I've had a lot of fun playing him, so I think you may just do too. If you happen to be interested in learning about the new unique systems coming to Season 3, want to hear about tech and fundamental game mechanics, or want to see more detailed character guides of the sort, why not like, share, subscribe, and ring the bell? I've got more videos coming. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.